In professional wrestling, where scripted drama and physicality intertwine, there are moments when the line between performance and reality blurs. While most matches go according to plan, some have taken a shocking turn, becoming real-life brawls. Today's video dives into some of the unforgettable instances when pro wrestling matches unexpectedly turned into genuine fights, leaving fans stunned and sometimes wrestlers injured. Professional wrestling is a scripted form of entertainment, but that doesn't mean real-life scraps don't occur in the ring. What should have been a routine win over enhancement talent Mike Bell during a WWE TV taping in 2001, Perry Saturn lost his cool and began plummeting his opponent. Despite what some think, it was not a simple act of malice on Saturn's part. Early on, Bell attempted a hip toss on Perry, resulting in the former European champion taking an awkward bump onto his head and neck. Saturn later explained that he was knocked a little silly from the botched move and instinctively went into attack mode, peppering Mike Bell with some real shots before throwing him hard outside the ring. Mike landed headfirst onto the floor, and fortunately for him, there was protective padding on the ground, or else he probably wouldn't have gotten up. Saturn was still not done and threw Bell with full force onto the hard, unprotected steel stairs outside the ring, where Bell landed precariously with the back of his head. Saturn, who seemed to be having a riot at the expense of the enhancement talent, then performed a well-executed brainbuster inside the ring, giving the jobber a chance to end the slaughter, but Mike Bell kicked out at 2. Why, Mike? After all that punishment, why didn't you just let the match end? Was it pride? Or a chance to get noticed? The match thankfully ended after a perfectly placed super kick, followed by a slight variation of the fisherman suplex. After this match, Saturn was given a gimmick where he formed an unhealthy obsession with a mop called Moppy. Some say this was in punishment over the Mike Bell incident. Although this Moppy gimmick got over with the fans and Perry Saturn remained in wrestling working for different promotions, he never again reached the same success that he enjoyed before the shoot with Mike Bell. Ken Shamrock spent a short time with the WWE, but in that short time he left his mark in the Attitude Era, being the connection between mixed martial arts and pro wrestling. Shamrock's first WWE match was No Holds Barred against VADER, and to this day this particular brawl stands out as one of the most stiffest matches ever worked in the squared circle. Maybe because back then nobody told Shamrock that wrestling is not real fighting like it is in the mixed martial arts. Shamrock came out guns blazing, throwing legitimate kicks and punches, and even ended up breaking VADER's nose in 4 different places. VADER, looking visibly rattled, whispered at Shamrock to ease up, but unfortunately the MMA fighter kept going and ended up injuring VADER's leg alongside his nose. At that point, VADER had enough, having quite the reputation himself as a stiff worker, and so in the closing minutes of the fight, VADER almost took Shamrock's head off with the most brutal looking lariat you'll ever see. After a brutal knee to the face, VADER clobbered Shamrock with a clothesline, and Shamrock collapsed to the mat, dazed and probably half knocked out. In fact, that wasn't even a lariat, as VADER just clubbed Shamrock in the head with all he had. Shamrock later secured an ankle lock and VADER tapped out, putting a stop to the matchup as the MMA fighter won. VADER was understandably pissed, but kept the anger to himself, and for some reason didn't develop a rivalry with Ken Shamrock backstage. Randy Savage and Jake Roberts were engaged in an electric feud, and Jake was doing everything he could to enrage the Macho Man. He would ruin his matches, jump him on the entrance ramp, and even threaten Miss Elizabeth. One day in late 1991, on an episode of Superstars of Wrestling, Jake had Savage's arm twisted in the ropes and directed his new snake named Lucifer to bite him. The bite was planned, but Lucifer the snake was locked on and refused to let go. For 34 seconds, people at home and in attendance watched in horror as the snake dug its teeth deeper into Savage's arm. According to Savage, after this incident, his arm blew up like a balloon, and about 5 days later, he had to rush to the hospital with a 104-degree fever. The fever later went down once the doctors gave Savage antibiotics, and luckily the snake was devenomized. But 12 days later, the snake died. Clearly, it was Randy Savage who carried the type of venom that could kill a snake from a snake bite. On an episode of SmackDown, the finalists of WWE Tough Enough were challenged to a shoot wrestling match by Kurt Angle. Unfortunately for everyone involved, it was still the Wild West somewhat back in 2004.
What's your name? Chris Rocky.
The first contestant was Chris Rocky, and as you would assume, Angle made quick work of the rookie.
You think you're tough enough? Yes, sir. No, you're not. Shut your mouth.
and legitimately fractured his ribs, awarding him one-way paid ticket to the emergency room.
You have nothing to say. You think it's funny? You want me to spit in your face?
The second contestant,
What's your name? Daniel Puder, sir. I'm sorry, what? Daniel Puder, sir.
Daniel Puder, decided to take on Kurt Angle, and that's when the turntables turned. After a quick face-off in the ring, the two locked up and soon Puder had Angle in a Chimera lock. Daniel had gained full position and could have sent Kurt into surgery if he wanted to. This was obviously not how anyone expected things to go, so the veteran referee, Jimmy Corderas, quickly counted to 3 in order to protect Angle, even though it was supposed to be a one-count match like in amateur wrestling. Kurt was visibly angry after the match, cause had it not been the quick thinking of the referee, Angle would have lost to a rookie and would have probably been embarrassed on national TV. Kinda like how Pakistan, a veteran cricket team, lost to the American team in the last Cricket World Cup. Does anyone here even know that United States has a cricket team?
For that, I hate each and every one of you. I hate you.
Japanese bad boy Koji Kitao and the man better known in the West as Earthquake, both former sumo wrestlers, got into a scrap during a match in Japan at SWS's Wrestle Dream in Kobe World Hall on April Fool's Day in 1991. It was obvious from the start that the two were not cooperating, with Earthquake, real name John Tenta, using his massive frame to immobilize his opponent, grabbing a wrist lock before taking him to the mat. Koji didn't take too kindly for this, rolling outside for a breather before attempting to hurl a chair into the ring. They attempted to do a test of strength spot, but when Koji Kitao tried to slap on an arm lock, Tenta swatted him away like a grizzly bear. The referee tried to get things back on track, but neither man was having any of it. Kitao then intimidated Tenta that he was going to take his eyes out, and then things completely broke down. John Tenta could be heard screaming that wrestling isn't real and could be seen visibly confused and angry. Koji, who had caused issues in both sumo and professional wrestling worlds due to his behavior and known for throwing tantrums, then lashed out and kicked the referee, causing the disqualification. Not content with simply ruining the match, Koji then grabbed the microphone and told the crowd that wrestling was fake and that he refused to lose to Tenta as scripted, suggesting that if it was a real fight there would only be one winner, before being escorted away by security, and subsequently was later blacklisted from the wrestling business for a while. Hardline Wrestling Association was a WWF developmental territory started in 1996 and had a slew of notable names such as a guy named John Cena, whatever happened to him, and the subject of this shoot, Rikishi. Rikishi is known for his easygoing character and affinity for sticking wrestlers' faces into his planet-sized posterior. However, it would shock the average fan to see the lovable giant had a temper. A receipt is when one wrestler legitimately hits another as a match goes off script. Such was the situation with Rikishi in his 6-man tag team match involving Haku and Russ McCullough, a former NFL linebacker who had transitioned to wrestling. During the match, Russ was meant to hold Rikishi in a position for a super kick from Haku. This is a tried and true trope in wrestling. The one held will escape the oncoming strike. Unfortunately, this did not go as planned, as McCullough did not let Rikishi go, resulting in the big man taking a full force kick to the face from Haku. Shortly after the spot, McCullough hit the mat and rolled out of the ring, only to see a furious Rikishi grab a chair and hit him 6 times, the last of which was in the face. McCullough promptly left the ringside area and retreated up the ramp. The match was completely left in shambles. This incident ultimately led to McCullough being released from his WWF developmental contract in 2001. In February 1990, in New Japan Pro Wrestling, 2 of the top wrestling stars were set to clash in a match which had Slobberknocker written all over it. Big Van Vader and Stan Hansen, both former New Japan heavyweight champions, known also for being extra stiff with their opponents, and 2 of a handful of people to dominate the Japanese wrestling legend, Antonio Inoki. Stan would come down to the ring and swing his signature bull rope, which had a cowbell at the end. While Vader was getting in the ring, Hansen took a swipe at him and it accidentally broke his nose. This sent Vader into a rage and the two began to hammer each other with real strikes. In the ensuing fight, Vader's eye was knocked out of its socket, and the only reason his eye was saved was because Vader was able to push it back in the socket with his hand. And later his eye swelled up shut, keeping it in place. The two behemoths would battle for another 10 minutes until the match would be ruled out as a double countout. There were no hard feelings between Vader and Stan after this event, and in 2016 Vader got the honor of inducting Stan Hansen into the WWE Hall of Fame. He was able to take a lighthearted look at the legendary incident and celebrate the career of his greatest friend and rival. All the incidents I've talked about took place in major companies. However, to reach the true bottom of the barrel of the wrestling industry, we have to visit the independent promotions. One such independent promotion was the IWA Mid-South, notorious for its vulgar display of violence, ran by the appropriately named wrestler Ian Rodden. During the 2008 Queen of the Deathmatch tournament, an incident took place that involved wrestlers Mickey Knuckles and Mike Levy in an intergender match. Mike Levy was a nobody who had only wrestled a few matches and as such was very inexperienced in the ring, whereas Mickey Knuckles had been wrestling for about 5 years at this point and was much more skilled than her opponent. Rodden apparently found Levy on a message board claiming that he was a fan of the tournament and had him flown in to compete despite knowing the risks. As with any other match in the IWA Mid-South, there were weapons laying all over the ring that the fans had brought in themselves. To set the match up, Levy was standing in the ring claiming he wanted to be in the men's tournament. Rodden comes out and declares that he would be in a tournament, just not the men's one. After calling him all sorts of derogatory names, Rodden then introduced his opponent, Mickey Knuckles. Rodden was a married man and he was having an affair with Mickey Knuckles at that time. So I guess some favoritism is involved here. However, I still can't understand why setting up a wrestling veteran against a wrestling noob would help Mickey Knuckles' career by any chance. The match then started and there was seemingly a breakdown in communication between the two wrestlers. Due to Levy's inexperience, which may I remind you is something that everyone knew when they hired him to work, Mike started improperly selling Mickey's already stiff offense and delivered some careless punches. Mickey responded by fully laying in her attacks and even headbutted Levy so hard that it left a bruise on her own head. Eventually, Mickey suplexed Levy onto a ladder in the middle of the ring and pinned him to win the match. As if the match wasn't already brutal enough, it's what happens after the match that is truly one of the most awful and horrifying examples of wrestling turning into a real shoot assault. Show promoters Devin Moore and Warren Tank rushed to the ring and proceeded to take turns jumping from the corner turnbuckle and full force stomping Levy's head into the metal ladder. All the while, the live crowd cheered for even more. Ian Rodden then comes out with his teenage son who, after asking his dad for permission, proceeded to beat Levy with a kendo stick. Rodden and his cronies kept delivering their style of justice while screaming into a microphone that Levy deserved his punishment for leaving Knuckles with a scar on her head, which she had inflicted herself by headbutting Levy in the first place, and potentially ruining her upcoming TV appearance with total non-stop action wrestling. In a karmic twist, a month after this incident, Knuckles would injure her leg in a very gruesome way and would later be released from her TNA contract. It's a miracle Mike Levy was not killed or paralyzed in these attacks, and he somehow managed to wrestle for a number of years before retiring. Shoot wrestling as a practice seems to be dying out in wrestling nowadays, especially in major promotions. With an increased focus on better pay, safety, and more forgiving schedules, the drug-fueled macho rage of the past and the quiet encouragement from the top brass has turned into an acceptance of what wrestling actually is. A professional environment where two skilled performers come together to put on a performance and still be able to walk away afterwards. Hopefully it stays that way. I have covered New Jack in my previous video on how many wrestlers this guy is injured. However, I do not think there is any need to go more into detail about New Jack since almost any match he has ever been in, even though I'm sure he sat down with his co-worker before the show to discuss the match and pre-plan everything, it still ended up turning into a real fight cause New Jack was in it. Maybe this was part of his gimmick?
I don't know!
But I do believe adding New Jack as an honorable mention in this video is quite justified. He belongs here. Was it a shoot? Was it a work? Was it a work shoot? Did they know that it was a work and worked themselves into a shoot?
I don't know!
The match did not have a good start to begin with, but at some point it got a whole lot worse, and the two were clearly not getting along. It was hard to tell for a bit, but the fact something felt off during Nia Jax and Charlotte Flair's match on August 30th, 2021 episode of Raw, and it was just about the most interesting thing to happen on a WWE flagship for about 5 years. The reason perhaps set things up was Nia's back suplex to Charlotte, which dropped her hard at a bit of an angle, and because of that the two were on the verge of throwing fists, with Jax trying to swat her opponent away. Charlotte started to sandbag on moves and threw out a few punches and slaps, with Nia firing back with a couple of her own receipts. Their timing was completely thrown off as there were several awkward moments where one tried to do some pre-planned moves only for the other to stop cooperating. Things mercifully came to an end when Nia pinned Charlotte following a very stiff powerbomb.